decades of experience. He's taught at the Art Institute of Atlanta. There is no question you could throw at him that he does not have a thoughtful answer based on experience. So it's a real treat, and I will do my best to answer. The promo code is Sigma25. I see some people asking some specific price questions. I will shoot you an email on that. And again, we will offer the 150 gift certificate at the end. And without further ado, I give you the great Brett Wells.
Thank you very much, Mike. I don't even know how to follow an introduction like that. But thank you, Mike, and thank you for supporting this. Definitely thank you to Samys and Samys Photo School for making this all happen today, and for Sigma for their part in making this happen as well. So let's jump on into the presentation. All right, and go to the next one. So today we are talking about waterfall photography. I like to start a lot of these presentations with a little bit of technical information, again, just so we're all talking about the same thing. And if I say a wide lens, a normal lens, whatever, that you know what I'm talking about, and that we're all thinking about the same kinds of things. So for waterfalls, normally we are going to be using lenses or using wide angle lenses. Usually you're close enough to the subject, you're talking about a larger subject. So you're going to be shooting something that's wider than normal. Normal on a full frame camera is about a 50. So if you have a DSLR or mirrorless camera with a full frame sensor, you're looking at something around a 50mm lens. So we're going to go to wider or smaller numbers than that. For APS-C cameras, then it's something usually around 35mm and wider. And for micro four thirds, it's usually around 24, 25mm for normal. And so it's going to be wider than that. It's all math, it's all related. So there's that factor, if you will, crop factor. There's all sorts of different ways to think about it, but basically a 30 or a 35mm lens on an APS-C camera shows us about the same thing as a 50 does on a full frame, or a 24mm lens does on on a micro four thirds rather, sorry. There are times, however, that you might want something long. So a lens that has a greater focal length or longer focal length. There's one waterfall in the Smoky Mountains that I can think of off the top of my head that's on the other side of a pool of water, and there's really no way to get any closer to it unless you want to go swimming. So you're usually shooting that one with a 70 to 200 from the opposite bank of the little pond. But other than that, we're usually talking again in the wide angle stuff. From Sigma, the things that we offer, we have a wide range of prime lenses. Most of those for full frame cameras will work on APS-C cameras as well. So the 14, 20, 24, 28, there's two 35mm, a 40, maybe a 50 if you're looking for in that range. In the zooms, there is a 12 to 24 f4. I'm really, really partial to our 14 to 24mm lenses. There are two versions of that. One for DSLRs, Canon and Nikon, works on their mirrorless cameras with their adapters. Or there's a 1424 DGDN that is natively designed specifically for mirrorless cameras, for Sony E-mount or for L-mount, which is our camera, the FP, which is what you're looking at me through right now, as well as Panasonic's S series of cameras and a couple cameras from Leica. Other zooms, there's a 24 to 35, which I carry around a lot. I'm still a DSLR shooter, so I carry that 24 to 35 a lot. It's a really versatile landscape lens that I find. 24 to 70s are great for this type of work. 24 105s as well, because you don't really need the 2.8 aperture. So any of those things are really nice for this type of work. I like 24mm and up, because they take filters natively with filter threads on the front of the lenses. By the time you get wider than 24, a lot of times you can't put filters directly on the front of the lens, and it takes adapters. There's ways to do that. It's just an added expense, and it's more stuff to carry around. So one of the things that is nice though about our 1424, the DGDN model, is it will take filters on the back of the lens, at least neutral density filters, which will do a lot of what we need to do. for this type of thing, for waterfalls. We'll get back to filters. We'll talk about what I use, what I recommend, and what they do as far as that's concerned for waterfalls as well. So a lot of these are going to be over here in the Southeast. I'm based out of Atlanta. I teach a couple of workshops in the Smokies every year. So we were talking about that just before the class. You'll see a lot of those kind of things. I know it's not a waterfall, but I put this in there just so you could see what 1/4 of a second does to the motion of water. So motion in a frame has a lot to do with the lens that you choose, how big the subject is in the frame, and obviously how fast the water is moving. And we'll talk about settings and those types of things as well. This is one of the ones from Iceland that we were talking about beforehand. Sorry, not for everybody here, but this is on the backside of the island. There were views like this every, I don't know, every couple hundred yards, every 1/4 mile, all the way around the island, it seems. It was really incredible. So the things that you need for this, other than the camera and the lens, and this is one of the nice types of photography that just about any kind of camera that you already have is going to work just fine. But what I really recommend is a good tripod and a really good tripod. The little flimsy things for long exposures, even the wind can cause some vibration and lose the sharpness in the image. Or cause you to lose the sharpness in the image. If you are around water, a lot of times I'm putting the leg of a tripod down in the water, and if the water's moving quickly, it can even buffet a tripod, especially a thinner, weaker tripod. So having something that's really solid for this, for longer exposures, can really make a difference. I'm a big fan of L brackets. There's one on the camera behind me, but that's not really helping you. But it's basically like a lens plate that's in the shape of an L. It goes under the camera, it goes beside the camera, and allows me to clamp the camera into the tripod horizontally and vertically without having to tilt the whole camera over to the side or tilt the tripod head over to the side and put the weight of the camera off the center balance of the tripod. Definitely a cable release. Self-timers will work for this kind of thing. I just get impatient when I have to wait 10 seconds or whatever every time I try to trigger the shutter. So I like to have a cable release with me, whether it's wired or wireless or an app on your phone, really doesn't make any difference as long as you know that it's going to work when you get to the end of the trail. That's one of the things with nature photography is you can't just go back to the car quite so easily or go back to your living room or whatever the case may be to get what you need. So you want to make sure that the cable release is going to work. Take extra batteries with you, those kind of things. Oh, look, extra camera batteries for more reasons than one. One, just to make sure that your camera isn't, the one that was in the camera isn't about to die. I always try to charge up a couple batteries every night before when I'm out shooting, especially for this type of thing, so that I know I have a fresh battery and a spare or two with me. But particularly for this type of thing, I'm using live view a lot for nature photography, especially landscapes or macro or those kind of things. And live view on an SLR will drain the battery as fast as looking at the LCD screen on a mirrorless camera, because they're basically the same thing at that point. Driving that LCD screen drains the battery power. So you definitely want to make sure you have an extra battery around with you. Think about the fact that you're going to be near water. If you're going to get in the water and it's cold, it's nice to have some waders with you or hip boots or something like that. Even if it's not that cold and you're wading in a pair of sandals, it's nice to have a towel with you to dry yourself off, to dry your tripod leg off, whatever it is that gets wet. But also the water coming off, if there's any kind of wind or you're close enough to the waterfall, a lot of times there's mist rolling in the air and it can coat the front of your lens or the filter or whatever that you have. So a lot of times I'll have a real soft cloth with me that I can wipe off the lens right before I try to take a picture. So anyway, so think about that. Filters, we'll talk about what they do, but the ones that I'm recommend that or the 3 categories that are relevant to this are neutral density filters, polarizing filters, and variable neutral density filters. And again, we'll talk about those in just a second, but my recommendation for filters is buy a filter that's big enough for the biggest lens that you think you'll ever use for this type of work, or use with that filter. Then you can use step-up rings or step-down rings to put that filter on smaller lenses or lenses with smaller filter threads. Usually until you get to the really, really, really ultra-wide stuff, that works just fine. And that way you don't have to buy multiple filters for every lens that you are likely to use. Used to be that it was a 72 or 77 millimeter filter thread on the big wide lenses. Now a lot of them are 82. Of course, that gets a little bit more expensive, but again, it's better to buy one and a less expensive ring to adapt them to other filters or other lenses. Again, about a ½ second exposure, some water. And then you're getting up to a second, and you can see that it's starting to blur even pretty rapidly moving water. All right, so filters, like I said, there are 3 basic categories for what we're doing. The first of those is a circular polarizer. And a circular polarizer just blocks light from a certain angle, a certain polarity that's coming from, bouncing off of subjects, coming from the light source, whatever the case may be. They generally block about 2 to 3 stops of light because you're canceling out or blocking light from different parts of the scene or from different angles. So it's going to decrease the exposure. For this type of thing, that's a good thing. We like to have longer exposures, and sometimes it's hard to get to those without using a filter. So a circular polarizer will help, usually, like I said, about 2 to 3 stops. There are high transmission polarizers now that are a stop or a stop and a half. But for this type of work, a good old-fashioned circular polarizer is going to do more, give you more benefit than those the fancy high transmission ones will. In addition, polarizers help to deepen the blues in the sky. So if you have sky above your waterfall, it can make those blues more intense, make the sky richer because it's blocking glare off the particles in the atmosphere. It can also help to eliminate glare off the surface of the water. So at the pool of water at the bottom of the falls, you can use the polarizing filter to help see through the water. So instead of just one shiny flat surface of water, you can actually see the rocks and the texture to the stream underneath the surface of the water. The next would be neutral density filters, and these 2 are probably the most commonly used, readily available in all sorts of different sizes, everything else. A neutral density filter, if it does exactly what it says it does, it adds density, it adds exposure, if you will, or blocks light, and the neutral part says that it does it across the entire spectrum. So a good neutral density filter really does that. It's just gray, it's perfectly gray. It just adds exposure and makes your shutter speeds longer. That's really all they do. Bad neutral density filters will make your images green or blue or some other kind of color cast. To me, it's throwing money away to spend $1,000 on a really good lens and then try to get cheap on a filter that's going to degrade the quality of the image. So spend the money on your filters, and like I said, do it once and you'll have a good set of filters that you can use. The next, though, is there's a category of filter called a variable neutral density, and a variable neutral density filter is actually 2 polarizers stacked together. It has one in the back that doesn't turn and then one on the front that rotates. And because they're 2 different polarizers, they're adding together the amount of exposure that one or that both of them would absorb. They generally will absorb somewhere around 2 to 5 stops, maybe a little bit more than that. Brands of filters, I'm a big fan of B+W. I've worked for the company for years, and I've used them before I worked for them, and I still use them after the fact. There are dozens of companies. It's really something I'd tell you to talk to Samys, any of the local stores, and get a recommendation for the particular filter that you're looking for. We'll come back to that. We'll save that one for the end if there's some more time. So variable neutral density filters, because they're polarizers, they'll do the same thing that a polarizing filter will do. They'll help you see through the glare on the surface of the water. It's just like having a pair of polarized sunglasses, if you think about it that way. They'll help to deepen the blue in the sky, and they'll increase your exposure, but they'll do it by more than a single polarizer will do. They usually come in a 1 to 5 or a 2 to 10. I don't recommend the really high level variable neutral densities. I tried it. I thought it was going to be a great thing to buy a really expensive 10 stop variable ND filter, and I realized that I can't really use it at 7, 8, 9, 10 stops anyway. Most of the time it gives you this kind of star pattern in the middle of the image because of the amount of light that the two polarizing filters are absorbing together. So what I've gone with is a 5-stop variable neutral density from B+W, and then I use a regular circular polarizer, or I have a regular circular polarizer, and I have a 10-stop neutral density filter. And between the 3 of those, I can do just about anything that I would need to do. Now, you can combine filters, but you don't want to combine a circular polarizer and a variable neutral density, because then you're making 3 polarizing filters together, and you're just asking for trouble. You really don't want to combine any more polarizing filters. So you can combine your circular polarizer with the regular ND. You can combine the variable ND with the regular ND, but just don't combine your circular polarizer with the variable ND. Nice thing about so as I understand a variable ND, it's actually a circular polarizer and a linear polarizer together, but I might be wrong about that one. What was I going to say? Oh, the nice thing about circular polarizers and variable neutral density filters is you can hold them up to your eye and turn the ring, and you can see what's going to happen to the light in the image. So if you stand right beside your camera, you can change the polarizer looking through it. You can see how the glare on the surface of the water comes in and goes away. Then all you have to do is look to see what point was on top of the filter. When you screw it back on the lens, move that around till that point is on top of the filter again. And then you'll get the same effect in the image that you had looking through the filter while you were there. Okay, we'll talk some more about filters as we go through here too. So a nice 5-second exposure, and you start to get that kind of cloudy look, the milky look on top of surf. You can definitely take it to extremes. You can go, I've seen 30-minute exposures of surf like this, and it looks like there's just a layer of fog on top of everything. I put that one in there just because it's on the other end of the range to show you what an 800th of a second will do to water, but also to show you how much glare there is on the surface of the water. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you should be aware of it. A lot of times it's hard to notice those things when water's moving. You're looking at the waterfall, you're looking at a rock, and you're not paying attention to the surface of the water and what it's going to do in the image, what it might be reflecting as well. So that's a nice that's a 13-second exposure. It's on Roaring Fork if you've ever been to the Smoky Mountains. But I tend toward that end. I tend toward longer and longer exposures as long as the camera can go, or as long as I can get to with filters, because I like that really smooth, creamy look on water. So technique, you want to start with the base ISO of your camera. It's going to be different for every camera, and we'll talk about exactly what that means and why I suggest that on another slide. But the recommended starting point is going to be base ISO for your camera. That might be 100, that might be 200, that might be 64 if you have a couple Nikon, one of the couple Nikon cameras that do that. But whatever that is, that's your starting point. For this type of thing, we're not really concerned. We're not trying to freeze motion. We're not trying to eliminate camera shake. Cameras are going to be on a tripod, and longer shutter speeds are generally better. So the base ISO, among other things, is going to help us get the longest exposure that we can get. Like I said, I'll come back to recommending filters and rings and stuff at the end of the presentation. Make sure you ask me after that, and I will go through whatever I can think of at that point. The next thing that I want to think about is aperture. And that is only for our depth of field. You want to turn your aperture high enough to get everything in focus that you want to get in focus. If you can't do it, there is a technique called focus stacking. That's another class, but you can look it up. You can actually take multiple images and in slices of focus, and the computer can put it back together so it's all in focus. But you want to set the aperture high enough to get what you want in focus. Usually I find f11, f16, something like that is sufficient. A lot of times with these really wide lenses, you have so much depth of field for a particular aperture number anyway, that I don't need to turn the aperture all the way up to 22 or 32 or wherever it goes. And that leads to the next point, which is be aware of diffraction. Theoretically, you're softening an image when you get to really, really small apertures, which are the really high numbers. It's just something that you should test on your lens. Take the same shot at 16, 22, and 32. Go look at them in the computer, zoom in at 100%, get them in Lightroom so you can see the same part of each image side by side, and you'll see a difference between them. Whether it's a big enough difference is really up to you, whether that's an acceptable loss of quality to get depth of field or not. It's kind of your choice. But so then the next question is shutter speed. That's the only other part of that exposure triangle that's left. And if you do want to freeze the motion of the water, then it's going to be higher, usually a 60th of a second, 1/25th, 250, maybe 500, something like that. If you're really close to the water and the water is bouncing everywhere. For blurring water, usually you're going to start at about 1/4 of a second or a half a second to get any kind of an effect, usually around 2 to 4 seconds to get a smoother effect, and then usually in that kind of 8 to 15, 30-second range to get the really smooth, creamy look to the water. And again, there's no right or wrong. This is your photography, so you can do it however you want, but also I'd recommend try it every different way. Try a 30-second exposure, try a second exposure, try something in between. Then when you go back to the computer, you can see what you like, and you can go back and look at the metadata, figure out which one you liked, which one you didn't, and how to repeat that the next time you go out to photograph. Then filters, first for polarization. If I'm gonna try to darken the blue in the sky, see through the surface of the water, whatever, I'm going to use the polarizer to get that effect. Then I'm going to use filters to get my shutter speed where I want them to be. If I'm shooting early in the morning, late in the evening, I probably don't need much more filtration than that to get really long exposures or get long enough exposures, especially with a low native ISO depending on your camera. If it's the middle of the day, then I start to think about using the variable ND instead of the regular polarizer, or I'll think about using that 10-stop neutral density filter behind the polarizer so that I can get to really, really, really long exposures. So it's kind of playing around with it. The nice thing about variable NDs are you can turn them and they'll change exposure. So as you twist the filter, you can control your exposure over maybe a 5-stop range. So if it's a little bit dark, you can just open the filter up a little bit and allow some more light to come through. But definitely do everything before you put the filters in front of the lens. When you put a 10-stop a 10-stop neutral density, even a 5-stop variable neutral density in front of your lens, you're not going to see much through the camera anymore. Even with live view and the ISO cranked up, you're still not going to see a whole lot. So my recommendation is get your composition first. I always walk around before I even pull the camera out. I just set my camera and tripod down and walk around the scene. And you'll see me like ducking down and standing up and leaning over and trying to figure out exactly the point of view where I want to put my camera lens. Then I go grab the camera and the tripod and set it up so that it's right there where the lens is where my eye was. But then I'm going to get the composition down. I'm going to get the focus down. I'm going to get an exposure without a filter that's right first. Then I can just adapt from there. I know that if I put a 5-stop neutral density filter in front of the lens, I could go from a half a second down to 1, 2, 4, 8, 15 seconds. The better you know those scales, the easier it gets. But you can also, it's usually 3 clicks on the dials on your camera because they're in thirds of a stop. So 3 clicks is 1 stop, 3 clicks is 2. You get the point. But then you can, after you get all those things right, then you can put the filter on the front of the lens and try to take a picture with the filters at the adjusted exposure. And then if it didn't come out right, make another tweak from there. So nice thing about Waterfalls is you probably didn't miss anything from one exposure to the next. We'll talk about, but the recommendation is don't put a variable neutral density and a polarizing filter together. You want to put, you can put regular neutral densities with a variable or regular neutral density with a circular polarizer, but you don't want to put all those polarizers together because a variable neutral density filter is a polarizer, is 2. You don't want to add a third to that. You'll see it. You'll see the effect in your image. You'll have a black cross in the middle of the picture if you put too many polarizers together or too much polarization. It's a nice 8-second exposure. That was older camera, but that was when the 35mm art had just come out. Again, just a hair under a second, and you can see what that does to the surf, to the waves. So let's talk about base ISO, native ISO. Those are 2 words that mean basically the same thing or mean exactly the same thing. It is the lowest ISO on your camera without going down to a low setting. Some cameras have L1, L2, L.3, whatever it is, or low 1, low 2. So we're looking at the last number before you get to that point. Low ISOs are artificially interpolated. They're math, if you will, in the camera, trying to figure out what the exposure should have been. So we don't want to mess with that necessarily. You can try it, but my recommendation is start at that base ISO, the lowest number that you can get to on your ISO dial. So you're holding or on setting, hold the button down, turn the dial until it goes down. Some cameras will only go down to 200, some will go to 100, some will go to 64. That's about all I've ever seen on photo cameras, on still cameras, are those 3 native ISOs. The reasons for that is, first, it's going to give you the longest exposures, which is exactly what we're looking for this type of photography to begin with, most of the time. 2, it's going to give you the most dynamic range. So you're going to get more highlight detail and more shadow detail than if you turn your ISO up to 800, 1600, 3200. I can show you the charts, but you basically lose, you're compressing the amount of information that the chip can record as you turn up the ISO. So keeping it down is going to give you more detail in highlights and shadows. It's going to give you the least amount of noise. Since there's really no processing going on, the camera is just recording exactly what the sensor receives without making any adjustments to it. So you're not creating any extra noise in the image, so that's a good thing. Not that you can't shoot at 1600 ISO with most modern cameras or higher without getting a lot of noise, but starting without it is even better. You're also getting more color saturation out of this. You're, again, better shadows and highlights. You're going to get the cleanest file. So it's a bonus. Not only do we get long exposures, or we get help getting toward long exposures anyway, and we get the cleanest, best file that we can create on the camera. So native ISO, base ISO, whatever it is you want to call it, that's where you should start. Like I said, if you have low 1 and low 2 on your camera, it will give you a longer exposure. You can try it out. And my recommendation is for those kind of things is always try it one way, try it the other way, go back to the computer and look at the 2 side by side, and then see what you think. If it's acceptable, go for it. If it's not, next time you're out there, don't do it. And then you've learned. So 4-second exposure just for the moving water. There's really nothing else in the scene that was moving, but I wanted a nice blur on that. That's the mill on the south side of the park. That's over on the east side of the park. This is a real good example of what a polarizing filter can do. Without a polarizer in this shot, you would just see glare on the top of the water all the way across that whole bottom side and right corner. But with a polarizer, it allows me to see the rocks through the water, and it adds a lot more information. It adds a lot more detail. It adds more things of interest to the image, more things for your eye to notice as it goes around the frame. That was in Iceland as well. So in I think they call it Diamond Beach, which is not like an official name. It's just what the tourists have decided to call it, I think. But using 3 seconds just to catch the wave that crashed in and then rolling back through, and kind of had to sit there and time it to try to get that kind of exposure as well. So some tips here. The first thing is we're doing everything that we can to eliminate motion in the camera. So we're usually using a tripod to get the camera out of our hands. That's the first thing, but then trying to eliminate the motion in the camera caused by wind. A lot of tripods have a hook on the center column or underneath the top plate if you don't have a center column on your tripod. They're there for a reason. It's not just to hold stuff for you to, a handy place to hang your sunglasses. It's actually there to add weight to the center of balance of the tripod and to lower the center of balance of the tripod, and it makes it more stable. It will vibrate less, it will rock less, whatever. So I've seen a lot of people just hang their camera bag from the middle of it. I know people who carry bags, like a nylon sack, and they'll fill it up with rocks when they get to a place and hang that on the center of their tripod. I know people who will just throw water bottles down in there out of the car, carry it with them, whatever the case may be. But that's one way to do this as well. If your tripod is in the water, again, if the water's flowing fast past the leg of the tripod, that alone can cause some vibrations as well. And then inevitably on a bridge, you set your camera up, have the most wonderful picture, get the composition, the filters dialed in, exposure, everything, and you go to shoot a 30-second exposure and a car comes along and drives across the bridge and shakes everything. Ask me how I know this. So think about those kinds of things. Even bridges that you wouldn't think would move, when you walk on them, there's enough vibration to lose sharpness in an image. So if you're with someone else, be aware of that. Be courteous of the other people that are around you. The second thing is make sure your filters are as good as your lens. Like I said, you're really throwing money away to spend money to buy a really great lens and then put a not so great filter on the front of it. And again, I'll mention some names when we get through here as well. But you want good filters that aren't going to degrade the image, that aren't going to lose more light than is necessary, all that kind of stuff. Think about framing elements. It's real easy to get to a waterfall and just stop exactly where it is. When you come around the bend, you see it, walk down to a rock, put your camera down, and take a picture of it. That's the typical tourist response. The thing I always encourage people to do is don't just take good pictures, create great images. Look for the details that tell stories. Look for the swirls of leaves in the water, or a leaf on a rock, or find a pretty leaf and put it on the rock. I won't tell anybody. Any of those kinds of things, but look for framing elements. It could be a branch across the top of the frame. It could be a rock in the foreground. It could be a cascade. You can use water as a framing element, but those sorts of things that make the images interesting rather than just an image that is about or of an interesting subject. Like I said before, you've already got this equipment. You've got the camera, you've got the lens. Hopefully you've got some filters, or you'll get some filters to try this out. Then you've already got the memory card. The worst that's going to happen is you fill up the memory card and you throw half of them away when you get home. But hopefully you learn from the images that you shoot. I always try to look at stuff and try to figure out what works, but also figure out what doesn't work and figure out why. Was it the composition that wasn't as strong? This one's better than that one. But for waterfalls, it can be as simple as, well, a 2-second exposure looks better than a 1-second exposure, and the 4-second exposure looks even better. So next time I go to a place that's similar to that, I'm going to be looking to shoot at those kind of shutter speeds. It can be experimenting with different filters, different combinations, turning your variable neutral density filters around, and definitely different compositions. To me, it's cathartic to hike up a trail to a waterfall and spend an hour or two, and just to be there in nature and experience the scene, but also to look for the different compositions, look for the small elements, one little cascade, the big fall, zoom out even more so you have some sky and stuff, and trees and clouds and whatever above the falls. Try a horizontal, try a vertical, you know, all sorts of things like that. Again, the worst that you have, or the worst that you've done, is waste a little bit of time and a little bit of room on your card. So I mentioned before, I'm always in live view for this type of thing. It's difficult to see through the filters. It's a little bit easier with newer cameras with live view or mirrorless cameras that you're looking at the LCD screen on the back. I find there are a lot of other advantages to doing it that way as well. And again, the advantages that mirrorless cameras have inherently, a lot of DSLRs have when they're in live view. And one of those is as simple as like composition aids. You can put a grid on the screen so you can make sure that the trees are pointing straight up and down. Some of the cameras have levels in them, so I can, you know, level the camera out and make sure that it's, you know, level to the ground and the waterfalls pointing straight up. It could be something like focus magnification. My camera is set so the center button in the middle of the pad that controls where the focus point goes will zoom into 100%. So I'm usually in manual focus. Actually, for this kind of thing, I'm always in manual focus, and I'm looking for a point about a third to half the way into the scene, from the rock that's closest to me or whatever's in the foreground, to the trees in the background or the sky, whatever, to the back of the waterfall. And then I'm going to pick something about a third or a half of the way through that frame, so that then that's my point of focus. And then my depth of field will go in front of that and behind that. So I'll find a rock in the middle of the little pool of water under the falls, put my focus point on it, and then push the center button, and it zooms into 100%. It's a whole lot easier and more accurate to focus that way than to try to look through the viewfinder on a DSLR or even the viewfinder on a mirrorless camera. The focus magnification is just, it's so much easier that way. There's also something called focus peaking. Some DSLRs have it in live view, but most mirrorless cameras as well have it. And that is like it'll give you an outline, usually a red line, and change the color. That shows you on the LCD screen exactly what is the plane of focus in an image. When you're trying to focus critically, open your aperture up. Don't try to focus at f16 because everything looks like it's in focus anyway. So open up to your widest aperture, 284, whatever it might happen to be. Adjust the exposure, then do your focusing, then move the aperture back to wherever it was. And again, watch your battery life, because inevitably when you're in live view, the battery is going to die a lot faster than you think. Do I protect the legs of the tripod when I put it in water? I don't, because for two reasons. One, the tripods that I have are totally sealed from the last leg joint down. So about the bottom foot or so of the tripod is waterproof anyway. And above that, there are O-rings in the seals, in the rings, the lock rings on the tripod legs that keep a lot of the water out anyway. And worst case, when I get back, when I'm done shooting, I can take the leg of the tripod apart and, you know, run a towel through each of the leg sections and dry it out. So I know they make sleeves that cover tripod legs. I just found that out recently, actually. They're kind of funny to me, but I don't. I just use my equipment. I try to take care of it, but I also let my equipment do what it was designed to do and get in sand and mud and water and all of those kinds of things. The tripod anyway, not the camera. So I guess the good point of that, all of that would be, if you don't know how to take your tripod apart and clean it, find a good video on YouTube, or ask somebody at Samys in the tripod department, right? Protection for the lens, well, the filter's doing a good amount of that. If there is more mist and whatever, like I said, I've got lens cloths with me that I'm going to try to dry off the filter in between shots. There are times that I've even had to do that, literally wipe the filter off and take a shot real quick and hope that enough mist didn't hit the front of the filter to ruin the picture. Leave it to me to find the best, or the shot that I want that's in the middle of all the water coming off the waterfall. But that's about the best you can do to protect the lens from the surface of the lens. The body of the lens, most of the lenses that we make now have some sort of weather sealing in them. And for the mist that's coming off the waterfall, I'm not really concerned about the lens itself. You can definitely get rain sleeves. The easy brand for that is Optech, OPTECH, I think is what it is, Optech. They're somewhere around $10 for a pack of 2, something like that. They're not a lot of money. There's one of those in every camera bag I have. And that will cover the camera and the lens, and it'll go all the way up to the lens hood and has a drawstring cord that goes around the hood. So that's the best protection you can get for your, or that's really, really good protection for not very much money. If you want to get something better, you can spend $50 or $100 on dedicated rain gear for your cameras. If you do it a lot, it's probably worth it, I guess. But, just to show you a 30-second exposure and what it does to the surface of I guess it's an inlet, but whatever, a bay on the East Coast. And again, waterfall in the park. That's with a 24-70. And this one took f/22 in order to get that rock in the foreground all the way up to the trees in the background in focus. That's a northwest Iceland. The mountain is called Kirkjufell. It's swarmed with people, but it's a really cool place. It's beautiful. All righty. So we had a lot of questions about filter brands. Like I said, the one that I use is B+W. They're distributed by a company called Schneider. They're actually owned by Schneider, I believe, in Germany. Heliopan, Hoya, High-Tech, Tiffin. They're all good. They all have strengths, some brands over other brands. I will encourage you, look for something that has brass rings. They'll cost a little bit more, but the brass just threads on the front of the lens a lot better, and they don't stick together. Aluminum filter rings sometimes bind together more easily. That's something to look at. And the step-up rings are the same thing. It's worth spending a little bit more and getting a well-made step-up ring than finding the cheapest thing that you can just to adapt a lens to a filter to a lens. If you cut corners, sometimes everything gets locked together, and it really can be difficult to get filters off the front of lenses sometimes. Okay. Did we have any other questions, Mike, that I needed to?
We are getting some stuff about tripods. You've been really good on jumping on them before, right when they come up.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So on some of those waterfall shots where your exposure is 30 seconds, how are you not getting everything else blown out and overexposed?
Well, that's what either the variable neutral density or the neutral density filter is doing. It's giving the variable NDs usually if mine's a 5-stop, so it's usually set about 4 or 5 stops. So where I might normally be shooting at, again, a quarter of a second. Keep in mind, you're at the lowest ISO, so the least sensitivity on the camera. And my aperture is usually higher, so that's allowing less light through as well. But then the shutter speed's usually somewhere around quarter, half, 1/8 of a second, something like that. Maybe 15th or something if it's a brighter day. Then with a 5-stop variable neutral density or a 10-stop ND, I can take that all the way to 8 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds.
Thanks. Sorry to have you repeat that.
Yeah, no problem at all.
And my ISO goes down to 50.
What camera do you have?
Sony A7R3.
I'm gonna have to check out. I have an A7R3, so I'll just trust you. I have that for the lenses that we have that are Sony mount. I've shot Nikon for 30 years, and I can't learn another camera. Like, Sonys just don't make sense to me. They're great cameras. The image quality is phenomenal. But anyway, exposure compensation. So I guess I didn't mention that. I'm always in manual exposure. I don't want the camera making any decisions for me, especially when there's long filters involved, or dark filters involved. When there's that much filtration, the camera's not going to get the exposure right. When you're talking about 30-second, 15-second, 8-second exposures, the camera's not going to get the exposure right. So exposure compensation is really not going to do much. It's not going to help. If you used it as a starting point, maybe, but then without the filter, but when you put the filter on, there's no way to add 5 stops of exposure when you've already got compensation. And so I would really recommend you just do this in manual. The nice thing that way too is every shot's the same exposure, so the camera's not changing. It didn't meter off a different part of the frame or whatever. So if one exposure wasn't exactly right, I know what I need to do to get to the right exposure, to get to the right settings after that. So I'm not much of a fan of exposure compensation. The tripod that I use is a company called Pro Media Gear. But a lot of the tripods that have twist locks rather than lever locks or flip locks are weather sealed on the bottom section. There's a number of different companies. I've used a lot of Benro tripods over the years. Manfrotto makes some great stuff. I mean, tripods are kind of like cameras. They're really a personal preference. How much weight do you want it to hold? How rigid do you want it to be? How small do you want it to fold up? All those kind of things.
Yeah, you answered most of them here, Brett.
Yeah, the f-stop question, it really depends on what you're shooting and how far it is from the foreground element to your background. Sometimes f11 is sufficient, and sometimes f22 is not sufficient. Again, if you don't know, you can see it through the camera. You can always take a picture and then zoom in later, foreground and background, and make sure that you got the depth of field that you needed. And if not, then step it up another aperture number and try it again. Lee filter is good. The holder system that they make is really nice. It gives you a lot more flexibility. I know that there's Nisi and what's the other filter holders that go on the ultra wide lenses?
Hoya?
No, I'll remember as soon as the class is over.
We actually, Sigma actually makes a camera, the FP that I'm using now, that goes down to ISO 6, which is the first camera I've seen to do that. Be good for waterfalls.
Yeah.
I think we'll go to the trivia question now and give away this $150 gift certificate if you guys are ready.
Sounds good, Mike. Let's get going on that.
Let's do it. I'm getting hyped up. I know you guys are getting hyped up there, spinning around in your desk chairs, and you will go ahead and type this in the chat, and then the first one that displays on Samy's end will win this prize. So be ready to type. What is pertaining to Brett's class? What's the recommended ISO for photographing waterfalls? Before picking numbers, we're gonna. What will you say, Brett? As well, I won't say anything here. There's a variety.
I saw 40 messages pop up, so some
people said numbers, some people use words, but. Although this first one, I feel like I'm seeing something. It's a misspell, but I would call it good. I don't know what you're seeing on your end, Rui.
Yeah.
It says case, but actually I
Well,
think,
no, that came up before the question.
oh, did it?
Yeah,
Okay, that's pretty quick. Okay.
that came up way before the question. So I don't know if Diana was just, I'm not sure what that means, but yeah. So
well,
Phil Buckman was the first one to enter 100, but were you looking for a word instead of a number?
Yeah, I was looking for native or base just because
So it looks like M. Fox.
base might have been the answer where it was this case.
So I'm seeing M. Fox as the first to write native. What are you seeing, Mike?
That's what I saw.
Okay, I'll go with what you say because it displays differently. Just everyone out there, sometimes you might see something different on your end than the host will see. So whatever Samy's is seeing first.
So Samy's is seeing native with M. Fox. So congratulations to M. Fox. If you want to write a chat to me personally with your contact info, you are the lucky winner of a $150 gift card that you can use at Samy's for any Sigma product.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey,
Is that M. Fox? Congratulations.
Hey, Michelle. Thank you. Thank you, Brett.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so, and I will let Rui get that information. And Brett, you're hearing a lot of praise here and you're seeing it in the chat. People are loving this class. And,
Yeah.
it was definitely a great class and our third class of the day. And we definitely want to thank everyone from Sigma for coming out here, all the people that signed up for this class. And thank you to Samy's Photo School for having us here and putting on yet another great event. And with that, I'll pass it off to Brett and Rui.
We have a question about the code for the Sigma discount. I believe it's Sigma 25.
Yes.
Right, Mike? Okay,
Yes.
so Sigma 25. Do you mind putting that in the chat for everybody?
Yes.
And thanks again to Brett. It was very enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
I had a great time today, and thanks to Sigma. Mike, it's been nice to spend the day with you.
You too, Rui, for sure.
And thanks everyone for being here. We've got a few more days of the holiday photo education event. We've got it going until Wednesday. So go ahead and check our website to register for 3 more days. And it's great to see you out here. Take care and have a really good evening. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you, Brett. See you, Rui.
I don't see where she